Do you know the true rule of forest fire lookouts? Not the one in the job listings, but the real rule. Never leave the watchtower at night. This is the beginning and end of everything. Don't know it? Then you're still fortunate. But once you hear this story, you'll know the rule. And once you know it, you can never forget it. Because those who know the rule automatically become part of the system. My name is Michael Thompson. 2 years ago, I was sent to a watchtower with 4 companions for a 90-day training program. I was the only one who survived. Every year, this training is repeated. Every year, someone disappears. And every year, the survivors become new rangers, sending the next victims to the watchtower. This isn't just a job program. This is a selection system. To protect people from the more terrifying entities lurking deep in the forest, we must regularly post watchers, and among those watchers, rarely does someone survive. Those survivors become the next administrators, maintaining the system. I'm telling you this story now. It's both a warning and a record, because if you're truly strong, you might be able to survive. But remember this. Even survivors can never be free. We are forever bound to this forest, continuing to send the next generation. It all began 2 years ago in November, right after I dropped out of college. Having lost my scholarship and been abandoned by my parents, I had no options. The job ad I found in the newspaper was, in hindsight, a trap from the very beginning. Immediate hire. 3-month probationary period with Forest Service, followed by permanent employment. Residence in park required during probation. Serious applicants only. I only read the permanent employment and free housing parts. But looking back now, there were other strange aspects to that ad. It was placed in the corner of the classified section on the last page of a local paper. The phone number had an unclear area code, and no contact address was listed. It seemed like an ad intentionally designed to attract only a specific type of person. Desperate people with no options who wouldn't dig too deeply into the details. People like me. The next day, I was being interviewed by Ranger Keller in his office. That office was also strange. It wasn't an official Forest Service building, but a room in an old building on the outskirts of town. A few forest fire photos hung on the walls, but they all looked strangely old, as if from decades past. Keller was a giant of a man, nearly 6.5 feet tall, thick mustache, shaved head under a wide-brimmed hat. While he looked at my resume, I was sweating nervously, but his gaze seemed to be observing me more than the resume, as if he were evaluating something.
Want to become a forest ranger?
Yes, sir. It seems like interesting work, and I need to do something. He smiled thinly. His eyes weren't smiling. At that moment, I felt like he already knew my answer.
Know anything about the program?
You lock us in a watchtower for a few months and test whether we can mentally hold up? Keller laughed, but there was something cold in that laughter.
Close, but locked up isn't quite accurate. You're free to come and go. During the day, that is.
He stared at me intently.
Night is different. At night, different rules apply.
I should have asked questions then, but people in desperate situations tend to overlook warning signs. I simply nodded.
Come back in a week. We'll begin training.
When the interview ended and I stepped outside, I looked back at the office. Keller's massive silhouette was reflected in the window. He was looking down at me, like a hunter who had found his prey. A week later, I headed to the watchtower with 4 other trainees. But at that time, I hadn't realized one important fact. Among all the people who saw that newspaper ad, we weren't the only ones who applied. Many others must have applied too. So why were we the only 5 ultimately selected? I understand now. We were the ones judged to have the most compatibility. Bruce Williams was a born leader. A big blonde man with a grip strong enough to crush my fingers during handshakes, yet gentleman enough to know exactly how much pressure to apply. A former military man who valued discipline. Miguel Rodriguez was thin and always had a cigarette in his mouth. Quiet but observant, an artistic type with deep knowledge of music. He would later share our fears. Laura Johnson was petite and a lover of classic horror films. At first, she showed interest in real horror experiences but would soon face actual terror. Claire Hart was blonde and kept her distance from us from the start. Her handshake was perfunctory, and she quickly pulled her hand away. She seemed to carry deep shadows, as if running from something. Keller handed out uniforms to us. Khaki shirts with "trainee" written on the back.
Now, let's go see your home for the next 3 months.
Bouncing in the truck bed, we shared our expectations and anxieties. Bruce and Miguel were confident.
I heard all the previous group disappeared.
Bruce suddenly said, "Got transferred or something."
No. One morning when a ranger went to deliver supplies, all the trainees were gone.
I laughed. You have a talent for storytelling. But Bruce didn't laugh.
It's 30 miles to the nearest base. Anything could happen in these remote areas.
Eventually, the watchtower came into view, a massive steel tower rising above the forest, like a metallic exclamation point. The 2-story house built at the base of the watchtower looked unusually small beneath the steel structure. The living quarters had a common room, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Strangely, the bedrooms had no windows at all.
There's a reason for that.
Keller said meaningfully. He gathered us in the common room and began explaining our duties.
Someone must always be in the watchtower. Monitor the valley 24 hours a day. Always wear your uniform when in the tower. This is extremely important.
Why?
Bruce asked.
The uniforms have special treatment. For your safety,
He pointed to the 2nd floor.
there's a hatch leading to the ladder up to the tower. Night shift workers should use it. And there's a rule you must absolutely follow.
Keller looked at each of our faces.
Never leave the house at night. This is a matter of life and death.
Why?
Bruce asked again.
It's 16 miles to the nearest base. The night forest is especially dangerous. You'll be safe in the tower. The hatch is built to be particularly sturdy.
Keller pointed to the refrigerator.
Safety rules are posted there. Follow them, and you should get through the 90 days without problems.
Weekly food deliveries, fuel until month's end, emergency shortwave radio. Cell phones had no signal.
If it snows early, radio us. We'll bring additional firewood and fuel. Good luck.
And Keller left, kicking up dust clouds as he drove away. The first 2 weeks were peaceful. Bruce organized a shift system. 4 people worked 6-hour shifts monitoring, with 1 person off duty. I volunteered for night shifts. I was naturally a night person anyway, and the others preferred daytime. We gradually warmed up to each other. Miguel and I shared musical tastes and often talked quietly about various bands during late nights. He liked punk rock, while I loved alternative. Laura was initially excited, saying,
"This is just like a real horror movie."
She spoke passionately about classic horror films, especially 1970s works.
But reality is much more boring.
She laughed. Only Claire kept her distance from everyone, though she seemed to open up to Bruce. You could see she carried deep wounds. The valley was beautiful during the day. Lush forests stretched to the horizon, and we occasionally spotted wildlife. But at night, that same forest transformed into a completely different place. The top of the tower was a box-like structure surrounded by glass on all sides, providing 360-degree visibility. The monitoring equipment was surprisingly sophisticated, complete with thermal imaging cameras. In the settings menu was an item called Night Special Monitoring Mode. This didn't exist in typical fire monitoring systems. Out of curiosity, I activated it, and the screen's sensitivity increased dramatically. And then I encountered the FIREFOK for the first time. When I first took the night shift, the valley was wrapped in complete silence. Around 11 p.m., I was fiddling with my cell phone. Thanks to the tower's height, I could get a weak signal. While scrolling through social media, something flashed in my peripheral vision. Looking down at the valley from the north-facing window, there was a light moving through the forest. At first, I thought it might be animal eyes reflecting light. But when I activated Night Special Monitoring Mode, what appeared on screen was clearly a human-shaped heat source, walking upright, swinging both arms. But the entire body was emitting abnormally high temperatures, as if burning from the inside. I reached for the binoculars. To the naked eye, the entity appeared as a human-shaped silhouette emitting pale light. I couldn't make out clothing or facial details, but it definitely showed human walking patterns. Interestingly, I couldn't hear footsteps from the entity. Despite walking through the forest, there were no sounds of stepping on branches or rustling through leaves. I pointed my cell phone camera at it, but nothing appeared on screen. It showed up on thermal cameras, but not on regular cameras. This wasn't a mechanical malfunction, but some kind of characteristic. The humanoid continued moving through the forest for about an hour, covering roughly a mile. It never rested or stopped, continuing to move at a constant rhythm. Then suddenly, it disappeared from the thermal camera screen. The temperature dropped rapidly. I spent the rest of the night patrolling between windows, waiting for the entity to reappear, but it never showed up again. This might have been why Keller prohibited nighttime outings. When the alarm rang at 6 a.m., I still had no answers. The only thing certain was that something we didn't know about existed in this forest. At breakfast, Bruce and Miguel asked about the night shift. It was peaceful. Just some strange lights. Human-shaped lights that showed up on thermal cameras but didn't photograph with regular cameras. Bruce laughed and joked about whether I'd mixed something strong into my coffee, but Miguel remained silent. From his expression, I was certain I wasn't alone. That night, I set an alarm for 11:30 p.m. to talk with Miguel. All day, he'd started to say something, then closed his mouth. Surely he'd seen something too. At night, when I opened the hatch, Miguel jumped. When he realized it was me, he looked relieved.
"Can't sleep?"
he said, offering me coffee he'd made. "Just woke up." "How was tonight?" He looked toward the north-facing window, as if searching for something.
"Quiet. Nothing special since sunset."
But the way he directed his gaze told the whole story. "Miguel, did you see something in the night forest?" He tried to laugh it off, but his smile faded.
"Maybe,"
he said.
"Sometimes I feel like my eyes are playing tricks on me."
"Did you see glowing people in the forest?" His expression in response to my question was the entire answer. He said he thought he'd dozed off the first night. Before this job, he'd worked day shifts at Waffle House, so staying awake past 9 p.m. was rare. When the glowing figure disappeared, he thought it was a dream. But when he saw it again tonight, he was convinced it was something more than a dream.
They move slowly through the forest and eventually disappear. I've never seen anything like this.
We talked for a while. When Miguel started yawning, I sent him to bed. That night, I saw the firefolk again. This time, there wasn't just one. When the first light appeared, I turned from the south-facing window. It seemed to appear in the same place as the previous night. While the first entity headed toward the previous night's disappearance point, a second one appeared. From deeper in the forest, moving slowly through the woods in the same way. I wondered why they didn't burn the forest as they moved. They appeared as high-temperature bodies on thermal cameras, yet the forest they passed through remained unharmed. Their heat apparently didn't cause physical combustion. Like the previous night, they moved for about an hour and a half before disappearing simultaneously. The temperature dropped rapidly and they vanished from the thermal cameras. This was the pattern for the first 2 weeks. I began looking forward to actually seeing the firefolk. Miguel also liked the name I'd given them. They never appeared during the day. At least no one had ever seen them. There were nights when Laura took the shift after Miguel, but she reported nothing. She just said,
It was a boring night.
This bound us together and fostered friendship. We spent time speculating about what they might be. And then in the middle of the second week, the situation changed. That night, when Miguel handed over the shift, he pointed to a small light in the northern valley.
Hikers, probably.
He shrugged.
I haven't seen any firefolk tonight yet, but maybe they're being cautious about outsiders.
After Miguel went to bed, I focused on the night watch. While waiting for firefolk, my gaze turned to the campfire down in the valley. It was unusual for people to camp at night during this season. The cold was harsh enough to make even the most determined hikers hesitate. The fire was burning high, probably to ward off the cold. I shuddered imagining camping on such a night. Later, the firefolk appeared. Surprisingly, there were more than usual. They appeared in the usual places, but tonight their path led toward the campfire. First two, then a third appeared behind the campers. Looking through the thermal camera, the firefolk heat sources appeared brighter than the campfire. As they approached the campers, I couldn't understand why the campers didn't notice. With such a temperature difference, they should normally notice. When the firefolk surrounded the campsite, everything changed in an instant. On the thermal camera screen, the campfire's temperature shot up rapidly, then in the next moment, everything dropped to ambient temperature. The 4 firefolk, the 3 campers' body heat, everything disappeared simultaneously. A few minutes later, I reached for the radio on the table. I pressed the mic twice as instructed.
Dispatch here. Watchtower 4. Go ahead.
Came Ranger Keller's voice over the radio. Thinking about where to start, I decided to tell him exactly what I'd seen. There was a campfire in the valley, about 10 to 15 miles from the tower, and it suddenly went out. Keller was silent.
Camping in the valley after sunset is against regulations. Probably poachers. Can you confirm the number of people and specific location?
About 3 people, I said, illuminating the table map with my flashlight. In the northern basin area, the fire suddenly went out. Silence again. When Keller returned, there was a change in his voice. Tension had clearly increased.
Copy that. We'll send someone at dawn. If the fire reappears, contact us. It's been dry lately, and wildfires this time of year become serious problems. Dispatch out.
That night, the fire didn't return, but the firefolk didn't appear either. I spent the rest of the night considering one terrifying possibility. If the firefolk had somehow processed the campers for some reason, what would be discovered at the scene tomorrow morning? While waiting for dawn, I felt myself becoming part of the system. By witnessing the firefolk and observing their actions, I was changing from a mere trainee into a witness, and witnesses can never remain uninvolved observers. Around 11 and the next day, Bruce woke me up. Keller had come to deliver the weekly supplies. While the others carried supplies, he called me aside to ask about the previous night's fire. I told him everything except about the glowing people. He nodded while taking notes.
This morning, I went to the scene with several other rangers. We estimate about 3 people were camping. They left, but scattered their equipment behind. We cleaned it up. Good catch. I'll put your name in the report.
He started to leave, but I still had questions. Keller, have you ever seen anything unusual in the night forest? He looked like he knew what I was getting at, but unless I said it specifically, he wouldn't either.
Interesting question.
He began.
I've seen many things in the night forest. What specifically are you referring to?
I started to speak several times, but didn't want to seem insane. Finally, I decided to say nothing. Nothing in particular. Just curiosity. He said have a good day and left, kicking up dust as he drove away. But as he was leaving, he turned back and said,
Michael, if you see anything, report it immediately. We consider your safety our top priority.
There seemed to be some implication in those words. That night was my day off. But near dawn, when someone woke me up, I panicked awake. It was Bruce. He was pale with fear.
I need to show you something I've never seen before.
He half whispered. I followed him up the ladder. When I reached the top, I had to squint. The valley was brighter than ever before. On the thermal camera screen, I could see 7 or 8 heat sources moving around. Bruce was watching my reaction. Seeing that I wasn't surprised, he guessed this wasn't the first time. I call them firefolk, I said. Miguel and I see them sometimes. They don't seem to want to bother us, so we just watch them. But they're certainly interesting. Bruce seemed much more relieved knowing this wasn't new to me. This was how we added a third person to our little secret. After that, Bruce watched them more carefully, and we talked quietly about them at night. I stayed in the tower that night and told him what I'd seen. When they all simultaneously disappeared from the thermal cameras, he was speechless. I didn't tell him or Miguel about the campers. We kept our secrets as much as possible. Late October passed, and November went by relatively peacefully. We continued monitoring the valley while doing daily chores. Keller collected garbage and delivered supplies weekly. The leaves turned colors, and the first snow fell around Thanksgiving. The valley changed from vivid autumn scenery to bleak winter landscape. We were told to be especially careful of fires during this period. Fallen leaves and dried wood were particularly flammable. But when the snow melted, I realized the valley wasn't the only thing changing. I began noticing the firefolk getting closer. It started as a kind of migration from the valley. They had always appeared in the same area as the previous day, but now they were getting a little closer every night. At first, the changes were subtle. The appearance points moved closer to the watchtower by just a few dozen meters. But continuing to observe every night, the change was certain. I began keeping detailed records. Firefolk appearance times, movement routes, temperatures on thermal cameras, duration. I recorded everything in a small notebook. I thought understanding patterns might help us find some countermeasure. Analyzing the records revealed a terrifying fact. Their movement wasn't completely random. Every night, they appeared at points closer to the watchtower and disappeared at closer points. Even more unsettling, their appearance patterns seemed to have seasonality. Since entering November, the frequency of appearances had clearly increased, and as December approached, this trend became even more pronounced. By early December, there were more entities than ever before. Every night, I watched 15 to 18 firefolk slowly moving toward us. Looking through thermal cameras, their temperatures were higher than before, and sometimes I noticed there was a kind of regularity in their temperature patterns. Complex temperature changes, as if they were trying to communicate something. That sensation grew stronger with each passing night. Sometimes I found myself unconsciously reaching for the tower hatch. An urge would arise to go down and approach them, but my rational side always stopped me. This was dangerous. This was exactly why Keller had prohibited nighttime outings. As they approached, I remembered the words Bruce had said when we first headed to the watchtower in the truck bed.
One morning when a ranger went to deliver supplies, all the trainees were gone.
Those probably weren't just made-up stories, and the previous trainees had probably seen the firefolk approaching in the same way. The next day, I called Miguel and Bruce outside and told them what I'd seen.
I've noticed it several times too.
Miguel said,
But why are they targeting us now? We've spent 2 months without attracting their attention. What's special now?
Nobody knows.
Bruce said.
Maybe they just became interested in us.
I shook my head. No, this is intentional. They've chosen us. There must be a reason.
Chosen?
Miguel frowned. Yes. Our placement at the watchtower, the night shift rotations, everything was planned. Keller knew what we would see. Bruce stared at me.
What are you trying to say?
This isn't a training program, I said. This is selection. And selection time is approaching. We decided to inform the others, but got the expected reaction. When we told Laura and Claire in the common room, their reactions were interesting. Laura laughed at first.
A real horror movie experience. But wait, a real horror movie experience. But wait.
Her smile gradually faded.
Are you guys serious about this?
Dead serious.
Bruce answered. Laura's face went pale.
But this is reality, not a movie. In movies, credits roll at the end and everyone goes home. But this is...
She began trembling. This was the reaction of a horror movie enthusiast when faced with real terror. Claire's reaction was even more complex. She stood up and looked toward the window.
I haven't seen anything.
She said quietly.
I haven't heard anything. And I don't believe anything.
Claire.
Bruce tried to approach.
Don't come near me.
She screamed.
I spent years running from things like this. I can't have it starting again.
She ran into the bedroom and slammed the door violently. Laura said, trembling.
This isn't a movie. This is really happening. What should we do?
We shrugged. We tried to tell them. With luck, nothing would happen. But I knew something would happen, and there wasn't much time. As Christmas approached and the end of the 90-day monitoring period neared, the firefolk continued approaching. More entities appeared each night. The temperatures on thermal cameras became very high, and if there had been windows in the bedrooms, anyone would have been able to feel the abnormal heat. I began wondering about this too. How long had the Rangers known about this? What did they know? And I understood the reason there were no windows in the bedrooms. It wasn't simply because the night forest is dangerous. Without windows, trainees would be slower to notice the approaching heat of the firefolk, and by the time they noticed, it would be too late. Also, having everyone sleep in the same building made it easier for others to notice when someone disappeared. But at the same time, sharing fear made group panic more likely. Everything was calculated. Our reactions, our actions, our choices. Everything was predicted. And on Christmas Day, they decided to take action. That day, we ate well. Keller had delivered ham and holiday desserts. Bruce handed out newspaper-wrapped pine cones and got some laughs. But beneath the festive atmosphere, there was taut tension. The three of us, myself, Miguel, and Bruce, shared a premonition that something would happen tonight. Laura said,
I still don't want to believe it.
while clearly being frightened. Claire stayed holed up in her room all day. Miguel had the early night shift. But when I climbed the ladder at 11:30 p.m., Miguel looked worried. No, beyond worried, he was terrified. The reason was immediately clear. The thermal camera screen was brighter than ever before. The entire screen was full of heat sources, visible from all directions. They had surrounded us, encircling the watchtower. I had no idea what they were planning to do. But the most terrifying thing was their number. I could count over 30, the largest gathering yet.
I think I'll sleep on the floor here tonight.
Miguel said quietly.
I don't think I could sleep knowing they're down there.
I agreed. But Miguel's face showed more than simple anxiety. He knew something. Miguel, did you see something? Something special tonight? He hesitated, then said quietly,
Their temperature changes. It was like they were having a conversation.
Conversation?
I couldn't hear any sound, but the temperature patterns on the thermal camera were like a complex language, and I somehow understood the content.
I felt a chill. What were they talking about?
About us. That tonight was the last night, and they were consulting about who to choose.
As the night deepened, the heat sources came closer and closer, and their conversation became more active. Temperature changes drew complex patterns, as if working out detailed plans. Finally, I said I'd wake the others and warn them. If we can gather everyone here, we might be able to hold out until New Year's. The Rangers must know how to stop them. But then something shook the base of the tower. It wasn't just vibration. It was like a massive heat source was enveloping the entire watchtower, causing regular temperature changes. I opened the hatch and felt the area around the lower ladder had become abnormally warm. Checking with the thermal camera, multiple heat sources had invaded the base of the house. But the hatch was made of special metal with cross engravings. That material and design seemed to be blocking their intrusion. There was a sound from the hatch. Something pushed against it but couldn't get through. But the sound wasn't just physical pressure. It had a complex rhythm, like many hands simultaneously striking the hatch. That rhythm had meaning. It was a message. We tried the radio, but only heard static. But even in the static, there were patterns similar to the temperature changes. The firefolk were jamming communications. Miguel and I grabbed what few weapons we could find. We found a fire axe and crowbar under the desk. We gripped them all night. We waited for them to break in, not daring to sleep. But around 3 a.m., the pounding suddenly stopped. Then we heard a woman scream from below. Laura's voice.
Help! They're too hot. Burning.
The voice was suddenly cut off. After that, complete silence fell. With dawn, we judged it would be safe for the time being. We slowly went down to check the house, but we couldn't find any trace of the other trainees. Their beds were still unmade, all their belongings left as they were. as if they had gotten up that morning and gone hiking barefoot. However, there was one anomaly. In each bedroom floor was a perfect circular burn mark, as if intense heat had scorched the floor. Measuring with a thermometer, only those areas maintained abnormally high temperatures. There were no other traces of the firefolk, no signs of intrusion or struggle at all. Without the damaged hatch, we could have believed nothing had happened. Miguel and I carried supplies up to the tower. The radio still wasn't working, so we decided to hold out in the tower until the next supply delivery. But the second night was even worse. This time the sounds were clearly more aggressive. All night we sat on the hatch, listening to the bolts securing it creak under attack. The hatch wasn't built to withstand this kind of thing. Looking at the thermal camera, multiple heat sources were concentrated around the hatch. They seemed to be coordinating attacks on the hatch. When dawn came and temperatures began dropping, Miguel and I sighed with relief. I was exhausted and wanted to sleep, but Miguel had other plans.
I think we should try walking out while it's light.
He said. I was lying on the blanket. My eyes were already heavy, and I looked up at him as if he'd said something unbelievable. We're both dead tired. We can't walk 20 miles from here before sunset, I pointed out.
We have to try.
Miguel said.
I'm not confident that hatch can hold out another night. I don't want to be trapped here to find out. What if Keller doesn't come on New Year's? What if this was all so he could feed us to these things and keep us trapped in the valley? Remember what Bruce said when we first came here. We're not the first group.
We continued arguing. Finally, he packed some supplies and left.
If I don't come back, hold out until the next supply run and tell the outside world the truth.
Those were the last words Miguel said to me. That night's attack was much milder than the previous night. Sitting on the hatch, I thought some of them might have gone after Miguel. I hoped they wouldn't find him. But I thought they would. I stayed in the tower for another 4 days and nights. From gripping the fire axe every night, blisters began forming on my fingers. But on the morning of the 5th day, when I woke to sounds at the front door, I knew I had survived. It was dawn. I had never been so grateful to hear the presence of another human being. Keller smiled up at me from the ladder.
I had a good feeling about you. I'm pleased that you're the only one to survive this round of probationary hiring. Now, hand over your uniform and let me teach you the real rules.
This was how I came to work for the Forest Service. Unfortunately, the firefolk weren't the strangest things I would see during my time in the forest. 2 years have passed since Keller drove me out of the forest in his old truck, but little has changed in the park. We still don't allow camping in the valley, but we clean up about 5 campsites per year. Some people simply don't listen or don't want to. Also, we never enter the valley after sunset, even in emergencies. This is an absolute rule. Under any circumstances, we don't permit campfires in the valley, but on clear nights we can see lights most nights. New colleagues explain them as aurora reflections, but I know the truth. My new duties were mainly daytime forest patrol and fire prevention education, but sometimes I'm given special assignments. For example, searching for missing persons. Every year, several hikers disappear in the forest. We search for them, but actually we just recover their belongings and create appropriate reports. On my first search mission, I found Miguel's backpack, about 3 miles from where he was last spotted, completely intact, as if someone had carefully placed it there. Inside the backpack were his ID, wallet, and a diary I didn't know about. The last entry was written the morning he left the watchtower.
Tonight, I have to make a choice. Stay barricaded with Michael or choose a different path. Truth is, I'm tired of running. No family, no place to go home to. But here, there's something like purpose. We're not just victims. We were chosen, and the chosen have responsibilities.
After reading the diary, I burned it. The official record states Miguel got lost in the forest and died of hypothermia. And of course, at least once a year, I take 4 to 5 future rangers to Watchtower 4 for their 90-day probationary period. In these 2 years, I've supervised 8 training sessions. I've sent in a total of about 30 trainees. Only 6 have survived, including myself. The survivors all share common characteristics. We all carried extreme loneliness, people abandoned by family, left behind by society, who had lost their way, and we all made the same choice. We tried to survive to the end without giving up. This was the true purpose of the FIREFOK. They don't simply kill humans. They test human will, and they select and preserve only the most compatible individuals. We survivors work in a special department of the Forest Service. Officially, we're regular rangers, but actually we're administrators. We bear responsibility for maintaining the coexistence system with the FIREFOK. I once asked Keller why we continue sending them when so few return. All he told me was this:
Son, those are the worst things in this forest. There are worse, more dangerous things out there. But if you can survive the FIREFOK in the valley, you have a good chance of surviving this job. Remember this. If not us, then innocent people would fill that role.
Keller wasn't wrong. Deeper in the forest lurk terrors beyond the FIREFOK. I've witnessed some of them in these 2 years. Massive heat sources lurking underground, cold creatures living in the trees, ancient vibrations echoing from lake bottoms. All of these are under our management. We need new administrators every year because this job consumes people. After a few years, we're no longer ordinary humans, and replacement becomes necessary. It's better not to ask what happened to our predecessors. We're just told they retired and are fulfilling new roles in the deeper parts of the forest. Today, I sent new trainees to Watchtower 4. 5 young people, all at rock bottom in their lives. People abandoned by family, chased by debt, who've lost their way. Looking at their resumes, I remember myself from 2 years ago, desperate, with no options, not probing too deeply into details. As Keller's successor, I gave them the same explanation. No nighttime outings, wear uniforms, follow safety rules, and the warning that different rules apply at night. Their eyes held the same expression I'd had 2 years ago, complex emotions mixing hope and anxiety. Tonight, they'll witness their first FIREFOK, and gradually, they'll learn the truth. Of the 5, probably only 1, at most 2, will survive. That's the statistical reality. But I know they're not just victims. They're candidates. And those who are chosen will serve a greater purpose. Deep in the forest, the FIREFOK roam the valley again tonight. While waiting for new candidates, they exchange conversations through their temperature patterns. I hope the new trainees will walk the same path. And at the same time, I hope they'll make different choices. But the choice is up to them. All I can do is maintain the system, manage the forest, and prepare the next generation. In the night forest, the glowing entities continue their walks, searching for new administrators while continuing the ancient cycle. And we rangers continue sending new trainees to the Watchtower today. Most of them won't return. But that's the only way to protect people from greater terrors. I'm leaving this record to maintain transparency in the system. For the next administrator, and for the record of truth. The true rule of forest fire lookouts is, never leave the watchtower at night. But that's only the beginning. The real rule is that survivors must continue sending the next generation. We are forever bound to this forest. But it's not a curse. It's a responsibility to protect innocent people from greater terrors. This is the true rule of forest fire lookouts.